a Bangladesh that is at peace with India can focus on economic development, use regional integration, while a Pakistan that's obsessed with Kashmir is ready to forego self-interest.
Hi, so in this week's Raja Mandala, it's almost a sort of continuation from last week. Last week we looked at Pakistan. This week we're looking at Bangladesh and India's relationship with Bangladesh and how, in a sense, it's also a lesson for Pakistan. The way India is sorted out. There's a legacy of partition there. In fact, it's much more complicated. There's a love-hate because of our
Yeah.
assistance with the War of Liberation there. And yet we have managed, it seems like in the neighborhood, arguably, perhaps, but the greatest diplomatic success that Delhi has had in the last couple of decades. One of the interesting things you pointed out was that Manmohan Singh began in good earnest, took that relationship forward with Sheikh Hasina to a large degree. And then Mr. Modi, because of the political will he enjoys in parliament and outside, has managed to take it even further. Resolve boundary disputes, water sharing agreements, things of that nature, despite, say, some opposition from West Bengal governments. But sir, in terms of Bangladesh, how do you see? Because there is a sense that as long as there's Sheikh Hasina, who has been a friend to India, sometimes arguably at domestic political costs, there is some anti-India sentiment in Bangladesh politics, and she stood by the relationship. Is the relationship mature enough now that, let's say, the BNP comes to power in Bangladesh at some near date, that it can withstand that kind of political change? We know it can in India now, we're certain of that. But can it in Bangladesh?
I think we're beginning to insulate the relationship from domestic turmoil in both the countries, because it's inevitable. There will be change of governments, change of rulers in both the countries, and the more we expand the relationship. For example, the trade has reached almost $16 billion a year. That's a fairly large sum. I mean, that if you see the stakes for a larger number of people in the relationship on both sides, then I think it acquires a stability. For example, power trading. You have actually, more and more. I mean, almost we mentioned there's 1,200 megawatts of power Bangladesh imports from India. It'll soon go up to maybe another 1,500 megawatts. So I think the more we connect, the more we have stakes in each other's growth, then I think it becomes insulated from domestic politics. So there's enough stakes. The second, I think India also, I think, is reaching out to all sections of the society, because in the past, that you're pro one party, you're pro another party. But I think for India, the stakes in Bangladesh are so high that it rightfully engages all sides. And similarly, for Bangladesh, they too engage. Look, today, Modi government is in power. Tomorrow, it could be somebody else. So I think for both sides, reaching out to a wider section, I think this is where I would say the failure of the West Bengal governments, where they've not taken the kind of commitment to build this relationship, and the kind of politics that we saw Calcutta play with the relationship. I think that's what has made it complicated. But the two central governments at this point, Delhi and Dhaka, I think there is strong commitment. Even if some other party comes to power in Bangladesh, I think there is enough strength today for the relationship to go. For example, the BNP, which was a pro-business party, but there's a lot more business today that is going on. And then the number of visas, Bangladesh High Commission, our High Commission in Bangladesh, that's where the highest number of visas are issued. So there is the whole link between, Dhaka, Calcutta, people want to come, so that movement of things has grown. And what we've seen happen in the last few years is really the growth in the relationship between Bangladesh and, on one hand, Assam and the northeastern states. So the number of stakeholders on our side has grown. The volume of, the size of engagement has grown for them. So it's been a mutually beneficial relationship. But whenever there is a change of government, you'll need some extra work. That certainly has to be done. But meanwhile, while we celebrate the strong relationship today, the column also talks about a number of unresolved issues. Those have to be continuously addressed, because you can't take each other for granted by in either side.
So everyone should read the column. It's on the IndianExpress.com and probably in the description wherever you're watching this video. So one of the things you mentioned in the column, for example, is it's a passing sentence with domestic politics. We have been, like you just said, you insulated. But do you think there is that tendency? It'll happen in Bangladesh, but India even now is the bigger country certainly in the region. That sense that it undermines, say, our soft power credentials, if not our economic, if not on the economic front. There's a certain tendency because of domestic political considerations by sometimes very senior leaders. I mean, it's not a small party spokesperson. Sometimes it's people who have high cabinet positions. Do you think that that is something to be, because we live in a world now where it will not be dismissed merely as domestic politics, and you make it harder for a friendly government to then there's a political cost to the friendship which need not be there.
No, I think, there have been instances on both sides where the domestic political considerations sometimes come in the way of the relationship. But I think there is today a strong recognition on both sides that, look, while these things happen, we can't lose sight of the value of the relationship. And my sense is, while there were a whole lot of issues during Bengal elections, I think since then, that has not stopped the relationship from growing. When Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, comes to India, she's scheduled to come early next month. That again, I think we will see more progress, more forward-looking agenda being developed. My sense is, for example, Assam, which has had historically complications with Bangladesh, today actually they find there is a lot of things they can do with for their benefit with Bangladesh. So this again, I think the number of stakeholders, the number of beneficiaries grows, then I think we can stabilize the relationship, notwithstanding the occasion there are elections all the time on both sides. There are coalition compulsions, but my sense is today the relationship has shown it can wither these kind of eruptions. But there are other issues, for example, on river water sharing, on better border management, on improved trade facilitation. There is a hell of a lot of things we need to do. For example, India, Bangladesh don't have a free trade agreement. Can we start negotiating a comprehensive trade agreement? Can we do more things together in the Bay of Bengal? We've settled the maritime dispute, but we can work together in the maritime domain. Bangladesh has historically been a leader in the regional institutions. Can we work with them to strengthen the BIMSTEC, for example, the Bay of Bengal community? So I think there are new avenues. The more we do, the more stable it becomes. So I think we're in a virtuous cycle. And with two strong leaders really on moving it forward, my sense is hopefully we will continue to go to a higher, more stable, more productive level.
So the last question is sort of footnote. You mentioned it in the piece, but just to go over it again, there is a sense that India had similar opportunity. India had raised. I mean, it's not necessarily a comparable relationship, but there is a similar history. You have similar cultural contacts and similarities. One people divided by a border, that kind of thing. But Pakistan on the economic front, in better years we had this sort of people to people is this overblown thing, but Pakistan, whether it was sugar recently and or I mean Imran Khan saying no, do you think that for the Pakistani establishment, perhaps even for India, it's maybe not be so obsessed with Pakistan when you have this other neighbor and focus on at least that relationship, like you say in the column. But for Pakistan, are there some basic lessons to be learned? Is it still trying to come out of now one of its worst crises ever, economically and perhaps politically?
No, I think, for example, when I refer to similar moves, for example, during the Manmohan Singh government, there was a serious attempt at negotiating trade understanding. And in fact, it was the Zardari government that said, look, we want to give most favored nation status to India. The cabinet moved a resolution and we were almost there. And I think the Indian delegations went there, commerce secretaries negotiated. But in the last minute, somebody pulled the plug on their side. Similarly, more recently, under the Modi government, you had, after the ceasefire, there was a talk about not a trade deal, but just two items being imported. And it looked like the army this time was supporting the resumption of trade relations, restoring ambassadors, etc. But then Imran Khan pulled the plug, because that's a paradox. In the past, civilian leaders wanted to do more things with India, but the military won't let them do it. But this time, military seems to be more open for engaging with us, while Imran Khan, for his own politics, is not prepared. Similarly, trade, for example, there was a huge petroleum problem for a long time during the UPA government. Again, there was a discussion of export of petroleum products from the refineries in India, which is in Punjab, just across the border. I mean, a 40-kilometer pipeline would get petroleum products into Lahore. The two petroleum secretaries had negotiated a major agreement. But in the end, again, I mean, for them, it would have been a really cost-effective thing. They pulled back. Trading in electricity. I mean, for example, today, just as we do in the case of Bangladesh, we could do the World Bank, the international institutions were ready to help in this process of creating power grid networks. But again, I think problem is for Pakistan that they have staked everything, saying, unless you do something on Kashmir, we're not going to cooperate. So that is the problem. I mean, we can't tell them, look, you change your priorities. But I think there are sections in Pakistan who rethink. For example, a lot of people, economists in Bangladesh and in Pakistan ask, why is it that Bangladesh has made economic progress? How come Pakistan today's GDP is $100 billion, less than Bangladesh's? Is there a Bangladesh model for economic development? So these they are being debated in Pakistan, but it still doesn't transcend politics. And therefore, for them, a Bangladesh that is at peace with India can focus on economic development, use regional integration, while a Pakistan that's obsessed with Kashmir is ready to forego self-interest. I mean, it's not that they're doing anybody a favor by trading with India. You can still have the dispute, like China and Taiwan have a dispute, but the trade between them is booming, right? So that's where the lack of pragmatism in Pakistan. That you can claim Kashmir if you want to, but to stop trade between Lahore and Amritsar, which benefits them, I think that's where the tragedy is. And whether they can actually get out of this self-enforced trap is the problem. And I think that's where one hopes the 75th anniversary of partition and the independence provides an occasion for them as well to reflect on where they are, why have they lost ground, and shouldn't they be resetting their own relationships? But then that is for them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, sir. Everyone, read the column. It's on the IndianExpress.com, and we'll see you next week, sir. Thank you so much.